Hello everyone, I'm back at it again in my little yellow kayak, and we have some challenges this afternoon. Somebody was here before me and they busted the ice about halfway out, and then they turned around and gave up. But I don't give up very easily when it comes to fishing, and with a little extra effort we're going to get there. Now this is another one of those situations where I'm going to say do as John says and not as John does. Because this is a little dangerous. You know, this is a good way, if you're not careful, to flip your boat and end up in icy cold water. I'm not recommending this. I'm just showing you what I did to get to the fish. And the technique here is, well, it's a little sloppy, but I'm trying to get that bow of the boat on top of the ice and then crush it with the weight of the kayak, and I guess my weight too. And it helps that it's a little bit warmer of a day today. Air temperatures are probably 45. So the ice is a little soft, but it's still, you know, giving me a good fight and offering plenty of resistance. Some air bubbles kind of chasing me out as I flail around with the paddle. But we're going to get there. Step by step, stroke by stroke, inch by inch. The ice is yielding a little bit better now. And I'm out there. Now that was the hard part. The easy part is catching fish. There's some more ice off to my right. And this isn't the first pond I was at on this day either. I stopped by another pond and that one was too frozen to bust through. Even if I could bust through, I wouldn't be able to cast anywhere because it was covered in ice. So this is a busy city pond. We got traffic on the far side. There's a gas station there. There's a bunch of commercial buildings. I think there's a Walgreens. There's a PetSmart. There's a chemical plant on one side. So this is an urban pond. When I was growing up, I grew up just outside of Boston, and I fished a lot of what I would call urban ponds. Some were in parks, little puddles and parks that had some fish in it. Some were just ponds surrounded by houses. And you can find pretty good fishing in city ponds. Sometimes you can't be... I ran into some more skim ice. Sometimes you can't be too picky about the fish species that you're going to catch. You know, some of them, the best fish species in a city park, it might be something like carp. Or depending on where you live, catfish, or bullheads, or channel cats, whatever. So sometimes you can't be too picky. You gotta kind of roll with the punches and fish for whatever is biting or whatever fish are biggest. But these city ponds have a lot to offer. They're convenient for a lot of people. And this one in particular, despite the traffic and the gas station and the chemical plant and the industrial buildings, the water's pretty clear. I mean, I can see into it pretty well, and there's at least, I don't know, 5, maybe even 10 feet of visibility. I don't have a lot of sun today, so I can't see into the water that well, but there's at least 5 feet of visibility. Water's fairly clear for a city pond, clearer than I expected. And I'm looking around at different weeds, and kind of the game plan for today is to fish water that's deeper than when I can see the bottom. You know, that's pretty rough. I don't have a fish finder with me today. I've had one out here before though, and the maximum depth is about 20 feet. It's what I would call a classic glacial kettle hole, and it has some weed flats that stick out a little bit further than normal into the hole. But yeah, it's basically a round puddle in the middle of a city. And the first thing I'm going to do is I've got a 13 fishing whippersnapper. That's the little one. I think it's the 80 size. And it's got a deep diving bill. I modified it with some heavier treble hooks. I think those are number 8 Berkeley Fusion trebles, round bend trebles. And they're a little heavier than the stock hooks, and that's all it took to get that bait to suspend. A lot of people will tell you don't mess with the manufacturer's hooks, or if you do, you want to find exactly the same weight. I have a different perspective. I think you should mess with those baits and get them to do what you want them to do. So we've got icy cold water today, and what I want out of a jerk bait is for it either to suspend perfectly or sink slowly. This time of year, if your jerk bait is floating, it's floating away from the fish, and they will not chase it up. So at least where I am, in very cold conditions, those are the two kind of flavors that I want out of a jerk bait: perfectly suspending or super slow sink. And anything else goes into a bin to get modified. And you know, you spend a little bit of extra effort up front getting those jerk baits dialed in, and then you break through the ice, and 5 minutes later you got the first fish coming in. And if I left that bait stock just how it was out of the box, it would have floated up and away from that fish, and he wouldn't have chased it. Now that's only about a pound or so, maybe a little more bass, but I really just started fishing. It's very cold. I've got no wind. These aren't the greatest conditions, but I'm finding fish in relatively short order, and that's basically all I could hope for on a cold winter day. This is mid-December when this is filmed. We're coming up on Christmas and other holidays, and so yeah, this is late in the year. The water temperatures are about as cold as they're going to get, and generally this time of year it can be some tough fishing. So really anything I catch today is a bonus. So I'm using that 13 fishing whippersnapper as kind of a search bait, trying to cover that mid-depth water, see if I can figure out a little bit of a pattern, or maybe where some fish are located on one section of the pond. And I've got no wind, so I went with the little one. I wanted a smaller bait, something not too intrusive. And it's winter time, and sometimes the fish aren't as eager to chase bigger baits. I'm really just using it as a search bait right now. And I got another fish. That one's a little better, maybe closer to 2 pounds. Just pulling the boat around a little bit. Yeah, he's not bad for December. Yeah, there he is, all curled up from the cold. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I put a little bit of scent on that little jerkbait, the 13 fishing whippersnapper, before I started throwing it. And that was Smelly Jelly Bass Feast. I find that scent helps, especially in situations where a lure is going to be sitting in the bass's face for a little bit, so that they have a chance to smell it, really. Compared with something like topwater, I almost never put scent on topwater because they're not really inspecting it very long. They're either going to smash it or they're not. But, in wintertime, little things like that can make a difference between a fish just looking at a bait and deciding to eat it and then getting a fish in the net. And there's another bass. Now, I haven't been here very long, and there seemed to be a bunch of them in this little area that I landed on. It might be a few degrees warmer out in the middle compared to the the edge of the pond where there's ice. Could be they're relating to a transition from the weed flat to deeper water. He's not bad for December, about 2 pounds or so. So what I'm going to do with that little jerkbait is I'm going to just fish around a little bit and try to cover some water the best I can with a jerkbait. I'm using longer pauses now. It's, again, it's December, so I let that bait soak for closer to 10 seconds. In the fall, I'll fish it with shorter pauses. But we're definitely into winter now, and I'm trying to count in my head to 10 seconds. I don't always make it to 10 before I give it a little pop or two. But that's the goal, is cover water, try to fish slow, give those fish a chance to come up and eat that jerkbait, and then reel up and make another cast. So I fished around a little bit more. I didn't really find another area that was as good as the first spot that I landed on, which was kind of out in the middle. And so I'm going to stick with the jerkbait for just a few more fish. And then what I'm going to do is start transitioning to different lures. Try to get them on slow rolling a Kayak Easy Shiner. I tried a blade bait. I tried a Ned rig. So I'm going to go through all those different lures, but the initial game plan was just to find some fish and then try to get them dialed in on different baits and see if one of them in particular was better than the other. So that's a little bass, little buck bass, maybe a pound. Maybe if I pulled on his tail a little bit, he'd go a pound. Little guy. But they're all good this time of year. So now I'm going to start fishing some other baits. And the first one is a Kayak Easy Shiner. Now this is a bait that I usually don't fish much except for in the middle of winter. It's got a very thin tail section, very subtle kick. I've got it on a little 1/8 ounce tin ball head jig head. And what I do is I cast it out, let it hit bottom, start reeling it in. And as soon as it hit the bottom, there's a fish on it. Now that tells me a few things. It tells me that the fish aren't super active, but they will follow a lure down to the bottom. And also that before I leave, I have to try a Ned rig. Because if they're picking the bait up off the bottom, they should hit a Ned rig too. But the reason I don't fish this Easy Shiner much, except for in the winter, is because they're very fragile. There's another little bass. And if a bluegill even thinks about eating that tail, the tail is gone and the bait is useless. In the winter, the plastic hardens up for all baits, but even the Kayaks, the plastic hardens up just a little bit, and it's just a little bit more durable. So instead of, going through a bait on every cast like you can in the summer, I can catch a bunch of fish on one bait before they eventually rip off the tail. And they will eventually rip off the tail even in winter. And, they might last 2 fish, it might last 5. But eventually they're going to rip that tail off. They're just not very durable baits. And the retrieve is this super slow meshing of the gears. So I'm fishing a spinning reel. Every once in a while I'll run into some weeds. I have to give it a little pop to clear it. But you want to be right down at the bottom, just gliding over those weeds on the bottom. So super slow retrieve. The fish are pretty inactive. And I just want to feel that handle meshing with the gears inside the reel. And I'm fishing even a little bit faster than I normally would. I've got some weeds underneath the water that I have to stay above. But super, super slow retrieve. That's the name of the game for, even if you were going to fish a Kayak Fat or some other swim bait, let it hit the bottom, pop it up out of the weeds, and then slow crawl back. You're not burning baits, just a slow crawl back. And the slower you can go, the better, as long as you don't hang it up in weeds or whatever's on the bottom, sticks, leaves. I just popped it there to keep it up above some weeds. But super slow retrieve. And I'm going to get some more fish on it. So here it is again. Super slow retrieve. I got just a little puff of wind now, which will help a swim bait bite. Jerkbait will catch them even if there's no wind at all. But for swim baits, I like just a little puff of wind. Just a little ripple helps. And something interesting is going to happen right here as I'm trying to move around some reeds. Fish picks it up. I wasn't even reeling. I just was moving the boat with the paddle, and maybe that change in direction triggered the fish, or change in speed. That one's a little better fish, maybe 2 pounds. It's not a giant. I'd like not to stick myself with that jig hook. He's thrashing around pretty good for winter. Yeah, not bad. Take him on a day like today. After that last fish, I had to glue the head of the Kayak Easy Shiner back onto the jig head. They're not very durable baits. I just try to keep them going as long as I can with super glue. But I got another fish. Usually I keep a pretty tight drag and then I loosen it up once they start pulling. He's not bad. Finally got my thumb on him. Yeah, it's a little guy, but he thinks he's big. It was mostly largemouth bass on this trip, but I did get one other species. Readjusting my drag after that last fish. And I was fishing pretty slow because I was pulling out line and messing with my drag. So maybe that says I should be fishing even slower. I think in winter it's often best to fish as slow as you can stand it. But anyway, that is a black crappie. He's not a bad one either. Like I said, I'll take anything this time of year. So I tried a few other baits. I fished a blade bait for a little bit. I tried a football jig, but there's just too many weeds out there for, well, really for either one of those. I just kept catching weeds. So what I did is I switched to a weedless Ned rig. There's a weedless jig head made by Arsenal. It's a tungsten head and it has a EWG hook on it. I add a little keeper with some fluorocarbon and a fly tying vise. I might do a video on that at some point. But basically it just keeps the Ned rig up on that EWG hook and keeps it from sliding down the hook when you set the hook. And I've got a hula sticks, a Z-Man hula sticks on that jig head. And it makes a great combo. It's one of my favorite lures for Ned rigging, and it's specifically on that hook. I don't really like it on just a plain jig head, but on the weedless jig head, I think it might be my favorite overall. There's a bunch of good ones, but that is probably number one for me. And the reason I got on this idea of fishing a Ned rig is because the fish were picking up the Kayak Easy Shiner off the bottom or on a super slow retrieve, almost dead retrieve, or when I'd kill the bait and mess with my drag. So that's telling me I should probably try Ned rigging just to see if they respond to it. So it's it's a pretty slow retrieve. Actually, it's very slow, and it should be even slower in the winter. And so I move the bait with my rod, and I'm probably moving it even a little bit more than I ought to. And then I just reel up the slack with my reel. I'm not moving the bait with the reel at all. I'm moving the bait with the rod. And then when I get a bite, I reel down to the fish and set the hook. So cast it out, let it free fall to bottom. Reel in the slack, and then I'm kind of shaking it but hopping it really along the weeds on the bottom. And the weedless hook, it really will come through pretty much anything you throw a Ned rig in, but it comes through the weeds and junk much better than an open hook jig head would. You can fish it through most anything you throw a Ned rig into. Also, I've lost the wind again, and that's another time where the Ned rig will pick up some fish where other baits might struggle. So that fish picked it up off the bottom. I reeled down to him a little bit and then set the hook. It's a fine wire hook on that Arsenal jig head, and so you need the right rod for it. That's a medium light rod with a decent amount of bend into it. I would call it a moderate fast action. You don't want too heavy of a rod because it's a light wire hook and you'll bend it out. But you need a rod with enough backbone, enough meat to it that you can set the hook through the Z-Man plastic and then into the fish. He's not bad. I'll take him. And yeah, they were eating the Ned rig pretty well. So, if I was going to come back to this pond this winter, and I don't know if I'm going to get a chance before the ice, seals it off, but if I was going to come back to it, I might mix up the baits that I was throwing a little bit. I might spend a little bit more time with the Ned rig, or I might try a different color of that hula sticks, or I could try a smaller bait. Just try to get dialed in a little bit better. I think I like that weedless hook because there are a lot of weeds on the bottom. It's got clear water, so I think the weeds grow out pretty far. There's good light penetration here. And the jerkbait Ned rig 1-2 might be a good combo. I can kind of locate some fish with the jerkbait and then pick apart the stragglers with the Ned rig. There's another one. They weren't too shy about hitting the Ned rig. Sometimes you can feel them like pulling at the tail or something. When these fish ate it, they ate it pretty well, and they held on to it and gave me an extra second to set the hook. I did put some Procure crawfish scent on it. Sometimes that can help them hold on just a little bit longer. He might be a little bigger than the last one, but not too much. I didn't run into any giants on this day. Yeah, maybe 2 pounds. So I got my bait all squared away again. Text posed. So it's the hook point is just barely skin hooked underneath that Z-Man plastic of the hula sticks. Making sure my drag's set the way I like it. I like it a little bit tight. And I just felt one bump it. And I'm going to see if I can get him to go. So I'm just kind of shaking it now. I'm not really hopping it like I was before. And I'm kind of picturing that fish looking at the bait. and deciding if he's going to pick it up or not. Again, I'm just using the rod to move the bait and the reel to pick up the slack. Shaking it. There was a fish on it before. See if he comes back for it. There he is. Loosen up the drag. He's not going to win any prizes, but maybe he's a little better. Not bad for a little city pond. So I had a good afternoon on this pond. Lots of fun catching the little pond bass. I don't know if any of them really would have broken 2 pounds. But here I am back breaking some ice again. Trying to make my way back to the launch. Helps that I busted it all up before, but it's starting to refreeze. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for watching. I'll list all the gear and lures and baits, etc. in the video description, just like all my other videos. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!